So this morning we have spent some time with some amazing speakers. We've covered topics including domestic abuse and sexism at work and pay and representation and lots of different issues around parenting and motherhood as well. And I hope you found it really, really useful. We've got 2 sessions coming up after lunch, and the first of which I know that a lot of people have been looking forward to. And we are starting this session, which is around menopause. Pause for thought. Why is menopause a workplace issue? And we are very lucky to have Sarah Davies with us, who is a co-founder and director of Talking Menopause. Sarah is a multilingual, experienced and qualified business coach, facilitator and trainer who previously spent over 10 years in senior international corporate roles at Fujitsu and Thomas Cook before moving into executive search. She has played an active role in a number of major cultural change and business transformation initiatives, working at a board level. Sarah feels passionate about making a difference to people's lives and has worked as a business manager to Dr. Louise Newson since the launch of menopause.co.uk and launched Talking Menopause in 2017 to educate and support men and women across all levels of the organizations about menopause. And Sarah has worked across industries with some really good companies on that. So welcome, Sarah. How are you doing?
Even better when I take my mute off. I'm very well, thank you. And I'm delighted to be here this afternoon. So thank you for welcoming me. While I'm talking, I'm just gonna share my screen, hopefully.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. I'll hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Elliot. I look forward to speaking a little later. So let's just get it right. All good to go, hopefully. So hi, everybody. Do you know the worst thing about sitting here looking at yourself while you're waiting is realizing how badly I need a haircut. Lovely to, I was going to say see you all, but I can't see you. But anyway, really lovely to be here this afternoon. I've listened to pretty much all the presenters this morning. It's been a fascinating morning, I'm sure you'll agree. I note that I have got the graveyard slot, so I am going to get you to do a little bit of work with the Slidos that Kieran so ably is going to be working for me. So there's a couple of questions, and what I would like to say is if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them out, and we will keep probably questions to the end as it's such a short presentation and I have a lot to cover. So thank you for the introduction, Elliot. I set up Talking Menopause about 3.5 years ago with Linda Bailey. I'm going to mention her very briefly, not least because I know and I believe there are a number of police colleagues in the audience today. Her background is very different from mine. She was with West Mids Police for 30 years and then completely floored by her own menopause. She was not for 6. She was off work for 3 months. Nobody diagnosed menopause at all, which I'll come on to a little later on in my presentation. And thankfully, she had a supportive male manager who encouraged her back to work. She still had a lot of symptoms. Anxiety levels were very high. She'd lost a lot of confidence. She had heart palpitations, very bad brain fog. Some of you who might be going through the menopause might relate to some of these. And she was unable to continue in her old role, which was effectively managing 100 frontline staff. So she moved into a cultural change role and put menopause on the map in West Mids Police. And then a few years after that, decided to take early retirement. We joined forces, and as Elliot briefly mentioned, I'm going to mention her briefly, and I won't apologize now for mentioning her later in the presentation as well, is menopause doctor, who happens to be my sister. She's the medic in the family, and we sat around her kitchen table and launched her menopause clinic about 6 years ago now. I must add that both her and I were perimenopausal and didn't realize it at the time, and she's now moved on to become one of the, if not the leading menopause experts in the UK. And I will talk a little bit about some amazing resources that can be very useful to you, your colleagues and your organizations, if you are, depending where you are on your menopause journey. So Elliot's given the introduction. I'm not going to talk more about us because actually today is about you. I'm just going to also say with regards to the topics we've been talking about today, I was the first part-time employee at Heidrick & Struggles, who are one of the top executive search firms or headhunting firms worldwide. Some 16 years ago, I persuaded them to take me on a 3-day week as a proper part-time employee. I've mentioned my menopausal experience. I've worked with a number of very challenging individuals over the years internationally. One that sprung to mind was a French manager. I was extremely discriminated badly against. I was only 26 and was the most senior female in the customer services organization, and it was tough as a Brit as well. And also I'm a recent survivor of domestic abuse. Just a little bit about me. I'd like just actually to put a Slido out now, please, Kieran. So I've got a question that I'd like to ask the audience, please. I'd like you please to, and hoping you're managing to work this okay. Any problems, please stick it in the chat function. But I'd like to ask you to write in, please, which one word you would use to describe menopause. Inconvenience, yeah, very inconvenience. Aging, wrinkles. So there's a few things coming through. One of the big challenges, just while we're getting some more words coming through, just want to say around menopause is that not many of us know much about menopause. It's not something we grew up with. 100 years ago, the average age of the menopause was around about 57, 58, and the average age that women died was 59. So, and a lot of women also suffered mentally very badly. Some women were put in mental asylums. Life is very different now, isn't it? A lot of women are sandwich generation when they hit the menopause or the average menopause age. And it's incredibly challenging for not only to be juggling your own hormonal challenges as well, but you've often, so many women have teenage children going through hormonal challenges as well, might be looking after aging parents, and then you throw a career into it as well and trying to keep your job going. And then there's COVID and the lockdown as well. So it's very, very hard for so many women, and unfortunately not enough people know about it. A lot of organizations now are starting to talk more about menopause. Menopause is very aligned to mental health, and it should be aligned more to mental health initiatives within organizations. And one thing I would encourage you in your organizations to think about is especially if you have got mental health initiatives, mental health first aiders, for example, is when I'm talking through menopause today, think about how you can perhaps align menopause with some of your mental health initiatives. So on the scrap hill, a few others. So thank you very much for sharing those. You can see actually, if you could unshare, please, so I can reshare. Thank you. You can see that already menopause means different things to different people. And unfortunately, because of that, it actually presents quite also some negative narrative around it. We've had lots of negative comments like negative old bag, old hag, or you're going to actually at a police conference in Cornwall. Some of the female police officers were accused of going to the Hormone conference, a very large retailer in the UK. Some women came to one of our workshops and they had to walk through an open plan office and were criticised for doing the walk of shame, or they felt they were doing the walk of shame because they were criticised and sniggered at. And a commercial bank, actually, who we've worked a lot with over the last 2 years, their very first workshops they ran with us, one for women and one for managers, they weren't allowed to advertise them. They weren't allowed to mention the word menopause in any of their advertising at all. Interestingly, both the workshops were completely full, but they weren't able to mention it. So why is menopause important? Why are we talking about it so much now? Well, as I've already mentioned, there is little or no understanding really of what menopause is and its impact. At school, we didn't learn about it. Now, thankfully, because of an amazing campaign that's been initiated called Make Menopause Matter, as well, from this school year, it's meant to be, but I've got 2 teenagers and it's not on their curriculum yet, but menopause is going to be introduced to secondary school curriculum, which is fantastic. But all women will go through the menopause. 50% of the population will experience it in some shape or form. And I'd like you to start thinking about menopause being a long-term hormone deficiency, because that's what it is. Unfortunately, the word menopause has a lot of negative or awkward associations with it. And globally, there is a lack of menopause training amongst healthcare professionals, which is absolutely shocking. We could write a book on horror stories, and I'm sure there's some in the audience today. I even received in lunch break a message from a client or somebody who had attended one of my client webinars, who has just been offered antidepressants from her GP, and she's really struggling and just asking me for advice of how to signpost her in the right direction. So in the UK, about 20% of women will sail through the menopause without any noticeable symptoms. So they will still experience this hormone change, but actually, as you can see from the figures there, 25% of the 80%, so actually a fifth of women overall will experience really quite severe symptoms, which will have a negative impact on their day-to-day lives. Over 3/4 of women don't realise their symptoms were due to the menopause. I mentioned myself and my sister as examples. It's really hard, isn't it? Because when women, and I must add that when I say women, I mean in the broadest sense, so any female who has female anatomy effectively, irrespective of orientation. We've worked quite a lot with transgender individuals as well, going through the menopause when they go through that sex change. As well, but actually over 3/4 of women don't realize it, and it's really hard, especially when it's more of the cognitive or the psychological symptoms that are affecting women. It's very hard to recognize whether it's menopause or whether it's just because they're having some stressful time at home, or whether it's homeschooling at the moment, or whether they might have been awake all night because the dog's sick, for example. So all the stresses of everyday life. So sometimes it's very, very hard because the menopause is different for everybody. Interestingly, or shockingly, only 12% approximately of women take HRT, hormone replacement therapy, who could. And a fifth of women actually leave work or change jobs due to their menopausal symptoms. From surveys that we've carried out across our client base, over 90% of employees say that there is little to no acknowledgement of menopause at work. So why are we talking about it now? Well, currently you can see the numbers on the slide, how many women between the ages of 35 and 55 are in the UK. It's estimated, and it's only an estimate because so many organisations don't have an policy, or sorry, an absenteeism clause for menopause. And again, that is something that I would encourage you to consider when reviewing and considering menopause guidance for your organisation. And from a survey of around 5,000 women that was carried out 2 years ago now, actually, you can see the numbers there. So shockingly, as I've already mentioned, there's very, very poor healthcare support for menopause globally. It's absolutely shocking. Someone who's worked in customer services for a number of years, I find it absolutely appalling that the healthcare community or profession can get away with offering such a poor level of service to such, in my eyes, a huge client base. So unfortunately, and again, I would encourage you within your organizations, and we spend a lot of time as some of us, especially our women only workshops or webinars, educating women to actually educate their GPs, because so many, as you can see from the figures here, unfortunately, are prescribed antidepressants. So more and more women are going to experience menopause at work. Why is that? Because we are an aging population, more women are in the workforce for longer, and that presents different challenges, and again, for you to start thinking about within your organization. So from a legal point of view, menopause could be a disability. because it has disabling factors that can have a negative impact on an employee's working life or working day for a sustainable period of time, i.e. a year or more. So that is very much to be mindful of. The Equality Act 2010, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, but when we think about menopause, the characteristics linked to menopause around can be harassment, obviously sex and gender, and around health and safety at work. Again, obviously working environments have changed hugely for so many, but not everybody. And I know we've got a number of frontline staff attending the conference today. For example, I know from the emergency services, and we've done a huge amount of work with probably about 6 or 7 police forces in the country. And actually, I just want to briefly mention Shropshire Fire Service, because they are a very interesting menopause role model. They're quite a small fire service, but they actually kicked off their menopause journey by introducing menopause awareness training for managers. But what's so interesting about it is that they made it mandatory for all managers to attend. So you can imagine some of the workshops that we rocked up to run, and there were some male fire officers sitting there with their arms closed. And when we asked the word, what does menopause mean to you? We were lucky if we squeezed 2 words out of them on the flip chart. But actually, once we started talking about it and opening up about menopause, they clearly realized the importance and the impact it has. And also a number of them, and I'm sure it's the same with a number of male colleagues as well. I'm not sure actually the audience, hopefully there are some male colleagues in the audience today, but actually so many men have partners or wives going through the menopause. So, and actually partners often need as much support as the women themselves. So health and safety at work is really important. Now, we have worked with so many frontline staff, whether they be in NHS or fire or police, who struggle to actually have a break to go to the toilet. Now, never mind when suddenly the menopause kicks in and there isn't a safe place or safe space for them to escape to, even if they just want a little bit of time out because perhaps a hot flush, perhaps a flooding, or perhaps suddenly feeling very emotional. So that risk assessment is again something to bear in mind and consider depending on the working environment. Obviously, there's so many employees that are now working at home, but working at home and having the menopause doesn't necessarily mean it's easier. A lot of women have told us, yes, it is, because they can hide away. They haven't got to get up and put some smart clothes on. They can stay in their pajamas all day. They haven't got to get out of the house to work. But obviously, it prevents other challenges because they can become even more isolated. They can be struggling with the pressures of home as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean because somebody is home working that actually they can cope with some of these symptoms more easily. From an economic point of view, I've touched on briefly. I'm not going to spend much time on this today, but I think again, just to dovetail some of the comments that have been made earlier in the day. For example, Lisa this morning, she mentioned about minorities, and it made me think, actually, and I'm very much not a feminist at all, as in the broadest, sense, truest sense of the word, but I feel very, very strongly about individuals or pockets of individuals who are discriminated unfairly against, probably not least because of my own personal experience and life experiences. But I think actually that word minorities, and I think actually the average woman in the average organization experiencing menopause or struggling with her menopause is absolutely a minority in the sense that they are really struggling and not recognized and appreciated and acknowledged. So they are perhaps seen as the minority, but in fact that the impact, and from a business case, and I would, ask you the open question, do you know the demographics of your organization? Do you know how many women could be suffering with menopausal symptoms and potentially off sick with their menopausal symptoms? But I can guarantee they'll be off sick with either anxiety or stress, or just called in sick with a bug. And also how many women, are you, or of your female employees, are you aware of the impact menopause is having on their productivity levels? So, for example, one council that we were working with, or we've been still working with actually, after one of our first sessions, said, actually, wow, I now understand what is going on with my body. The 3 days since I attended that webinar have been more productive than any day in the last 3 years of work, because she had been suffering for so long. So the cost to organizations of the lack of productivity of employees is huge. Now, I've already touched on the negative stereotyping. Again, we've touched on a little bit of that, of discriminating this morning with those fascinating presentations that we had. And again, I think overall, and thankfully in the last few years, mental health challenges at work, for example, and it's going to be even more prevalent now, isn't it, as we hopefully gradually ease ourselves back into normal life post-lockdown. But mental health is going to become more and more prevalent, and there's going to be a massive impact. And I think also to be mindful of the menopausal challenges that employees are going to have as well. And I think, again, revert back to what I said earlier, it's about trying to think about menopause. Again, it is that long-term health condition, and it should be linked to some of your mental health initiatives, and we genuinely believe. So I'm just going to show you some live examples here. It's a snapshot of actually 2019. There's some of our clients from 2019. You can see the numbers for yourself on this slide. I'm not going to read through them all, but overall you can see that the majority is saying, respondents saying, that menopause has a massive impact on performance, and they felt the need and the importance of normalizing menopause at work. And overall, unfortunately, it's very, very little evidence. What I will say, though, and I know a lot of the audience, or the majority of the audience today, are public sector. Overall, the public sector organisations are a lot more proactive at introducing a menopause culture into their organizations than the private sector. You can see some quotes on the screen here. I'm just going to pick up on one. So the individual that actually ended up going off sick for 2 months with stress, she had actually had an open conversation with her female boss. So interestingly, it was the female boss. So it's, you can't stereotype from a manager point of view as to which manager or which gender of managers might be more supportive than another, but this female boss didn't want to listen to her. I was very dismissive of the menopause conversation she had, and therefore the poor individual ended up going off sick for 2 months with stress because she wasn't getting any support. So many employees are actually masking, concealing their symptoms because they don't have the confidence to openly share them in the workplace, which obviously has a massive negative impact on productivity levels, and also a lot of not only women leaving their jobs, but actually, we talked a little bit about glass ceiling this morning, and there are a lot of organizations that we work with, and I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination, the organizations that don't have a female on their board is down to the menopause, but certainly there are a number of senior execs who do reach a glass ceiling and struggle to get any higher because of their menopausal symptoms and struggle. So that's something, again, to bear in mind. So here are some examples, again, that you can see as to why women why women don't want to make their employers aware of their symptoms and speak up. And interestingly, sorry, I flicked to quickly there. Let me just move back. Now, interestingly, from our survey, now we talked earlier about networks, and absolutely networks are so important, whether it be your own individual network, a mixture of home and work network, obviously professional networks in your organization. So I know a lot of your organizations have women's networks. A lot of menopause networks are evolving, which is really encouraging. And we work with a lot of organizations helping them set up and run their menopause networks or support groups or menopause clubs or the M Club. One NHS trust in Birmingham calls it the M Club, and actually their weekly, no, not weekly, sorry, bi-monthly meeting, no, bi-weekly, anyway, twice a month meeting. They actually walk around the outside of the hospital sites. The trust covers the six main hospitals in Birmingham, so they walk and talk about the menopause. But interestingly, less than 10% will speak, or just under 10% will speak to their line managers or feel confident to speak to their line managers about menopause, and less than 5% will speak to HR or occupational health. So actually, could we have the Slido, please, Kieran?
Yeah.
Thank you. So the next question I just want to ask you is, how confident, just to get a feel again for the audience, how confident do you currently feel about having a menopause conversation at work?
And just a reminder, everyone, to participate in the poll, you can scan the QR code in the top left-hand corner, or you can open up another browser on your phone or tablet and simply go to slido.com and enter the event code #womenatwork.
So thank you for the results. So interestingly, so about a third of you, and is there any more coming in? Because
that's closed now, Sarah.
So thank you, Kieran. So actually, which is really positive. So actually well over a third of you feel really confident to have a menopause conversation at work. But then actually there are also a third of you who only feel very slight level of confidence, or actually don't have any confidence at all. So thank you very much for sharing that. So let me just, and answering that question, let me just jig around here and get back to which is very annoyingly, it goes back to the beginning of my presentation. Apologies, let me just whiz down. See, Slido seems great at the time, but actually it's quite a bit of switching around, isn't it? So the slide I had up here just now, which I'm just going to show you. Now, these are examples from our survey of comments that a range of employees, so male and female managers and women, have shared with us. So just wanted to put those in front of you just to have a little read of. Because some of them might resonate with you or with your organisations, and how perhaps menopause is supported or not at the moment. So I've touched on some of these already, and actually the biggest ones for women when the menopause hits them is actually the anxiety, the brain fog, and sleep deprivation are the three big ones. Yes, hot flushes, and 80% of women will experience a hot flush, but actually the biggest impact that women tell us is actually the impact it has on their self-confidence and their self-esteem. And they just feel they don't know themselves anymore. A lot of women tell us they feel like they're wading through treacle at work and they're struggling to perform. And actually, even in many cases, mundane tasks that they have actually been able to do and been done for a number of years. And that is another reason why, unfortunately, women lose their confidence and struggle to actually move on up the career ladder. So I would, again, rhetorical question, because we haven't got time to have a conversation about it today, but I would ask yourselves, how easily in your organizations are these challenges recognized and accepted, and what level of awareness do you have around menopause within your organizations? So very briefly, because I haven't got time to go into a great level of detail, but what we feel is so important is that all employees, whether they are male or female, young or old, have evidence-based facts about the menopause. and non-biased, because it is up to the individual to then make an informed choice, whether it's a woman going through the menopause herself or a manager trying to support a woman going through the menopause, have an informed choice of how to support either themselves as individuals or support and signpost somebody else. So by definition, menopause is a pause in the menstrual cycle. I've mentioned it's a long-term hormone deficiency. It is one day by definition in a woman's life. It is the one day when women haven't had a period for a year. And most women experience a natural menopause, but a number go through an induced menopause after, for example, a hysterectomy or certain types of chemotherapy, when menopause can literally be propelled, or they could be propelled into menopause. Can be overnight or in a few days or weeks after surgery. Before that one day that I've mentioned, women go through this perimenopausal phase, which means around the time of the menopause. Now you've got a little glimpse behind me, and I'm going to put her on the screen in a minute, of our Meno lady that we call her. And this is when some of these symptoms can start occurring. So typically on average, it can be sort of early to mid 40s, but some regular symptoms might start occurring. And this is because of the hormone levels. The main hormones that affect menopause are estrogen and progesterone. When they don't work so well together in women's ovaries. And it's at that point that when these levels start dropping and when they're at the lowest, women's symptoms are at their worst. And estrogen, which has the biggest impact, goes on a crazy roller coaster ride in women's bodies and then flattens out eventually, but never regains naturally the levels they were before women go through this period of their lives. So a lot of women say to us, oh, but I want to go through my menopause the natural way. Well, natural is potentially considering replacing hormones. After that one day in their lives, women are postmenopausal, and these are the average ages in the UK. But I really want to highlight again, because it's not just an older woman's problem. 1 in 100 women under the age of 40 will experience a natural early menopause, and 1 in 1,000 under the age of 30. So very important for younger colleagues. Quite a few clients we work with are introducing menopause, even on manager induction programs, for example, again, to make that awareness available and that knowledge there for the younger employees, and not just for women when they reach a certain age. So there are at least 34 possible menopause symptoms. Again, this is our lovely Meno lady that a lot of clients have adopted. So for those who are in offices, quite often put on back of toilet doors as screensavers, shared a lot on intranet sites as well, because it's a very, and I'm sure that perhaps if you look at it, there will be a number of symptoms that you think, oh, I didn't realize that was down to the menopause. And it's because we have estrogen receptors as women all over our bodies. And that's why there is such a variety of symptoms, and no two menopause is the same. It's so individual and it affects so many different people in so many different ways. So there are solutions. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. The menopause is incredibly challenging for so many and really debilitating. And we have met hundreds of women that have been suffering for years and years. But I really want to just reassure you briefly that there are solutions. Women do not have to suffer in silence. They do not need to go through it. Now, for the average woman, the benefits of taking HRT, hormone replacement therapy, which are those 2 hormones I just mentioned, estrogen and progesterone, and replacing them in our bodies. I can openly tell you I would not be able to do my job without HRT at all, and my brain wouldn't function. I was getting very forgetful. I quite often couldn't get the words out of my mouth. I would literally knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't speak. I had that complete disconnect between my brain and my mouth. And so many women share that. Brain fog is one of the biggest challenges, really challenging in a work situation. And that is again why it's encouraging, and the main if nothing else today, and I know a lot of you feel very confident about speaking about menopause in the workplace, but if nothing else, I encourage you, or I set you the challenge over the next week to go out and have a menopause conversation with 3 people that you've never had a menopause conversation with before, because a lot of it is about just having that conversation and talking, if nothing else. But certainly an amazing starting point. So I haven't got time to go into HRT solutions, but HRT is natural. The ones on the screen are plant-based. The safest form of estrogen is through the skin in the form of a gel or a patch. And women who have a womb also need progesterone. And it's not just about alleviating the symptoms that women are struggling with, but as I mentioned, by replacing these hormones, it also future-proofs women's bodies against future health risks. So, for example, heart disease, HRT reduces heart disease by 50%. Osteoporosis, so 1 in 2 women not on HRT in later life will experience a serious fracture due to a lack of estrogen, because estrogen plays a very important role in our bone density and regenerating our bones. Also dementia and type 2 diabetes. So it has a lot of preventative factors as well. Just very briefly, I'm going to mention that it's also, and there's early stages of research, but for COVID, more men have been hospitalized than women with COVID. And there's some initial research that has taken place that has actually shown that women who've been on HRT have been less likely to be hospitalized than women not on HRT. And that is because estrogen has a lot of immunity factors as well in our body. So there's more work being done in that area, but just wanted to mention it because it is very interesting for those who are interested. Lots of complementary therapies, and I know especially through lockdown over the last year, so many organizations have introduced a lot of wellbeing initiatives, such as yoga, remote Pilates, perhaps CBT, which is very helpful for anxiety and low moods. And I know, and I think, again, the key thing is when considering, looking at your well-being initiatives is that it's, and I'm sure, again, so many of you have had to do that over the last year as well, is looking at that whole person. And that's, again, with the menopause, it's that holistic view, because it isn't a one size fits all. And it's been really tough for managers over the last year. Somebody mentioned this morning about managers having to get to know their employees a lot more, and what support has been given to the managers, because managers need educating and support in how to support their employees with some of these challenges, not least the menopause. And when we joked with one fire officer actually down in Devon a couple of years ago, and he sat at the end of a managers workshop that we'd run, and he said, I'd be really open, I've got an open door policy, I will talk to anybody about anything and happy to support my female staff with their menopausal symptoms, but if somebody comes to talk to me about their vaginal dryness, I am not going to talk about it. And we sort of laughed and joked about it, but actually that is one of the symptoms that we do make managers be aware of, because 80% of women have serious problems, so often can't wear trousers, sometimes can't walk or sit down comfortably because of a lack of estrogen in that part of the body. A lot of alternative medicines out there. Natural doesn't necessarily mean better, and that kite mark is very, very important. And I think the advantage, again, back to those women's networks in your organization, or some of you might have already, and the police have been amazing, and I would say the police are actually role models around menopause, introducing menopause culture, and if you like, the menopause movement within organizations. But I would actually, looking at the lifestyle as well, consider some of the lifestyle challenges that I just mentioned there. So it's not just about hot flushes, it's about normalizing it. It's about making it visible, having those conversations. It's very much about breaking the silence. And after that, sharing your knowledge. Now, there's just, I know Elliot's appeared because I just need to move on to questions very shortly, but just wanted to share a slide here after this one, and again I would ask you to take away from today with how visible is menopause in your workplace. Jill's touched a little bit on policies and the association with policies gathering dust on a shelf. And I would say, you don't need to spend time on a new menopause policy. There's a lot. ACAS is a brilliant source for menopause information, the CIPD is, and actually look at your existing policies and guidances and see how menopause can be adapted and introduced and aligned with what you already have in place. So awareness raising is absolutely key. The education, obviously, of your employees, and then looking at how you actually sustain and support your colleagues going forward. And it's future-proofing it. So it's not a quick fix. It's not paying lip service to it by offering a quick awareness session. It's actually in the same way that your other wellbeing initiatives have been introduced. Menopause should be exactly the same as that. So there's a few, I appreciate I'm whizzing through these, but you will receive a copy of the slides. So these are some questions, again, that I would like you to consider or take away with you. So how well do you actually know your organization's demographics? Do you have a menopause guidance in place? Is menopause on your D&I agenda? I've talked a lot about mental health, absenteeism, I mentioned briefly. And is it part of your training program? And if it's not formal, how about informal? A lot of organizations kick off their menopause journey through a few women getting together and creating a menopause support network, sometimes online. Certainly lots of clients we've worked with over the last year have kicked off online menopause support networks. So I am going to leave you here with some further information to signpost you. Please don't hesitate to ask us. I'm Sarah with an H at Talking Menopause, or hello at Talking Menopause. Menopause Doctor has a wealth of information on her website. There are lots of free booklets as well that can be downloaded. You can add those to your intranet if you want. There's one on breast cancer and menopause. There's one on menopause and partners. So a range of booklets. And the Balance app I'm mentioning here is a free app that Louise launched last summer that 100,000 globally now use it. But again, is something that you might want to signpost your female employees to, because it's a very supportive app for managing, tracking symptoms, and has a lot of community support on it as well. So I appreciate that it's been a little whistle-stop tour of menopause this afternoon. I have very limited time. As you can hear, I could talk about menopause all day and all night, but I'm going to stop talking and pass back to Elliot. And feel free to ask me any questions that you would like. Thank you, Elliot.
Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. I love how you and your sister are working together on this. A powerful family. That's really nice to see. A couple of questions. So when we did the Slido, it was good that a lot of people comfortable talking about menopause in their workplace, but also some people that weren't as comfortable. So what advice would you have for those people to going back into their workplaces? How can they start that conversation with colleagues? How do they approach that conversation with their managers, HR, etc.?
It's a tricky one. I mean, I would certainly go back, and an easy one opener, say, I've attended Supporting Women in the Workplace conference today. I listened to a presentation on menopause. I hadn't realized the impact menopause had. So actually they could go back and make some very neutral comments, as opposed to if it is somebody who is suffering themselves, they might feel that they don't want to talk about their personal challenges and make it very personal to them. So I think it's asking some open questions to their colleagues, perhaps stating that they listen to a presentation, throwing some few facts out there. In parallel to that, I would say, again, back to that network comment, talk to people that you know well, that you have a good relationship with, and it will snowball. It's like anything, isn't it? It's like if somebody's pregnant, for example, and menopause is a little where pregnancy was probably 20, 30 years ago. Suddenly everybody wants to talk about pregnancy, or they've got a pregnancy story. So it's a tough one, because it's easy for me to say, yeah, just go and talk about menopause. But I think actually having a conversation with a friend and being neutral, I would say.
Great. And last question, quick fire question. Where have you seen good practice around menopause support in organizations, and what particularly did they do?
So I guess one example, and I guess given the audience here today as well, is Devon and Cornwall Police, for example. And I think the key advice, first of all, menopause is a journey for an organisation, not just for the individual, but for an organisation. And what they, within Devon and Cornwall Police, did so well, they had a women's network, and spun off that, they created a menopause support network. So it's approaching it top down and bottom up. So for ideally, menopausal women or women's network getting together, creating some conversation, recognizing, supporting colleagues, but then really trying to make sure that there is a senior sponsor. I can't stress that highly enough. So, for example, at Devon and Cornwall Police, they had a chief superintendent, and she's now retired last year, but assistant chief constable who sponsored it. She made the commitment to attend the workshops that we ran for both women, or conferences we ran for women, and workshops for managers. The other thing is to include managers. It's not just about the women. It's hard to make training mandatory, I recognize that, but actually it's about educating everybody, especially managers as well as the women. And then in parallel to that, from an HR point of view, is actually working with HR and the wellbeing team. And as I just mentioned, don't feel you have to rewrite and start a new menopause policy from scratch. Unison is another good source of information. I've mentioned ACAS and CIPD, but actually look at how menopause can be aligned with mental health, your other wellbeing initiatives, and also some of the HR policies, for example, around absenteeism, and other long-term health needs. And I think those are probably, and because I haven't got much time, I think the other thing is again, it's not a quick fix. It's not just scratching the tip of the iceberg. It's ensuring that education and culture change and acceptance continues over time.
Thank you, Sarah. And there is one more question. If you could answer this just in 1 minute, because we have to move on to the break. So I really want to get to this question. I think it's quite important. It says, BAME women already suffer prejudice and have to work twice as hard in many cases to prove their worth and ability. How can this group of women be encouraged to speak up more about menopause without suffering double jeopardy?
It's a really difficult one, and there isn't a quick answer. I haven't even got a long answer, actually, because there's very limited research at the moment about the BAME community and menopause symptoms, because there are a number of ethnics that suffer certain symptoms a lot worse, and it's still at the early stages of research. So it's difficult, but I would say, actually, I think other ethnics, someone like me, white, Caucasian, can be as challenging. So I would say, there's some research coming out slowly, but it's at its really early stages, unfortunately. It will be shared more as it evolves. But I would say, talk to friendly colleagues, because actually so many non-BAME employees are massively discriminated at work because of their menopausal symptoms at the moment. Right. So I know it doesn't directly answer the question, but it's a tricky one.
Thank you, Sarah. No, thank you for your session. Thank you for your time. It's been interesting. We've all learned a lot. It's been very, very informative.
You're welcome.
So thank you for the work you do, and thank you for spending time with us. We really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome.